This is Platemark with me, Ann Schaefer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on prints and the printmaking ecosystem, and Platemark is a podcast about that very topic. In it, I am interviewing people who occupy various roles within the ecosystem and trying to shine a light on all of the various ways that people can establish careers in the ecosystem that are not necessarily directly the creative ones that you can be in the art world without being the artist. But today's guest is, in fact, an artist. Her name is Ellen Heck. Ellen's journey as an artist is one of exploration and reflection and connection. Her work provides a rich tapestry of themes that resonate with us, offering both immediate aesthetic pleasure and deeper intellectual engagement. This episode offers a glimpse into the creative process of one woman. We talk about her several series of portraits, which are usually of young girls dressed as, say, Frida Kahlo or donning a fascinator in the shape of a Mobius strip. They're portraits of openness and innocence, but there's more to it, of course. Another series of dry points features domestic scenes of parents and very young children that echo the color prints of Mary Cassatt. Ellen also works abstractly, piecing together squares of mixed media over a printed color wheel shape. Various rules of engagement are implemented, like each square cannot have the same medium as the one next to it. The blending of techniques means that the viewer's constantly discovering new layers and connections, and the results are just gorgeous. Ellen is super thoughtful and philosophical about her work, and we kind of get deep in it, so I hope you will enjoy the ride. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images we talk about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also hit the support and donate button on the website and help me keep the lights on. That would be awesome. And, by the way, I recently added a listener survey to the website. Click that button and let me know about your listening habits. It'll help me hone the content of the pod to suit your wishes. All right, let's get rolling. Ellen, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on Platemark.
Thank you for having me.
You've been on my list for a long time. Ever since I saw long ago, probably 10 years ago, I haven't figured out which exact show it was, but it was at Davidson Gallery. It was the first time I'd walked in there in Seattle. And I always loved, talking to Sam at the print fairs and everything. And I was like, oh, I'm in Seattle. I'm going to go see. And there your things were on the wall. It's like, who is this? I need to talk to her. And here we are.
Well, I'm glad you did.
The first thing that I think grabbed me was how much they are, and they were all portraits of these young, usually girls, probably in fascinators, probably as Frida Kahlo, I'm not sure, but I was like, oh, Mary Cassatt, here we are, and I just thought, this is someone who appreciates the shoulders upon who she stands and gets that, there's a rich history behind all of us. And I just thought, oh, these are so cool. I love them.
Oh, I'm glad. There's definitely a Mary Cassatt link there. Yeah, actually, this is a book that changed my life.
Oh, okay.
I found this at Moe's, and there have been great Mary Cassatt print books since then, but I loved this one because I found it while learning print at SAIC, and in it, they have all the state proof, so you can really see what she did and how the plate evolved and all that kind of stuff. And I did a deep dive master study of her work there, and I thought that was going to be enough, but it took me, I did more master studies for years after that to really feel the whole thing out.
Tell everybody what the book is. Is that Nancy Matthews catalog?
This is Mary Cassatt Color Prints. It's by Matthews and Shapiro. I love this book. One of the main things, there were so many things I learned from this book, but just to list them out. One was that she erased so much. It didn't occur to me, but because she's doing dry point, and you really can burnish things back out. I think when she would proof and see that the secondary plate was doing the work that needed to get done, she would then go back and take those lines out of the key plate because they weren't necessary anymore. And I think that's a huge part of what makes her dry point so dynamic, that she went in and went out and then went in and went out. And I really didn't appreciate it until I saw the state proofs in here.
Okay. Have you seen the Cassatt prints live and in person?
Yes, the most recent show.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I didn't.
Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. I feel like they did everything right, especially when prints are shown against a dark background. I find that to be really lovely. And there's all these state proofs, and there were several areas where they really allowed you to, they would bring 3 proofs that were pretty significantly different from each other, and you can compare them. And they had a couple of prints that were framed with double glass so that you could see the front and see the back. So yeah, that was excellent.
Was this in Boston? Where was the show? I can't even remember.
This is in Philadelphia.
Oh yeah, Philadelphia. Right.
So
yeah, of course, because she's from Philadelphia. I didn't get up to see it. I don't know why. I live an hour and a half away. It's bad.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, there are Mary Cassatt prints all over the place,
Yes.
so that's good. But
Yeah, I love the idea that the thing that you took from her was a simple compositional choice, which is to try and create form without outlines, right? But that it can have such an effect on the effect of the work, on how you perceive it and everything. And I love that even more than her interesting and groundbreaking at the time domestic scenes, that it was her method of creating those images that was what got you.
I think it was. I do think that I've learned when I don't do that, when there's redundancy, like when there's a line that's also describing a shape, I don't like the way it looks. It looks a little bit like a coloring book. So I think it's super important to the work being something that you can move your eye around and have flow. But a lot of my work from that time, when I was looking really closely at her work, my color areas, which would have been the equivalent of her aqua templates, are on wood. So
Yeah,
that's a little bit different.
Yeah, let's talk about that part.
Yeah, that was partly because copper was really expensive. It's really expensive for students. And also I rationalized it because she was looking at and inspired by that ukiyo-e show that came to Paris. And so I thought, okay, well, if she's trying to get a kind of Japanese woodcut look with aquatint, then it's okay if I use wood to do those same areas as well. And there were benefits to it. You don't have any issues with the pigments interacting with the metal. And so you can get really clear, bright colors. So that was nice. But other things happened that I didn't expect. So that was sort of where the journey all began and then snowballed from there. So, like, for example, I noticed that I felt like her color areas were soft and adding pattern, and her sharp lines were keeping the space still, while her figures had more movement because she would often erase and move an elbow over and things like that. So I was trying to, and I often do this, when I see something that moves me in a certain way, then I try to figure out what it was that did it. You feel a thing, but you don't always know why exactly or how to recreate that feeling. And so I really was trying to recreate that feeling and failed miserably, because when I was doing the pattern areas on the woodcut, wood is different than paint on aquatint, and so it was really like going in a certain direction and all this kind of stuff. So my prints I felt like they were the opposite, where the background was shooting everywhere and the person was really still. But even though it didn't turn out how I wanted, it was good to see, okay, well, that's what's happening there. And then I can take that to the next project and the next project.
It makes me wonder why Cassatt decided to do all of that color work in aquatint, because it would make more sense to do it in wood. But you do the difference in, as you say, the brush strokes that you will get on some of those patterns that she does are very difficult in wood.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be hard, I think.
Yeah.
It might have had to do with just the paper, because I can't use a traditional Japanese woodcut method, because it's water-based, I think that would be really hard to mix the dry point line. Not impossible. I'm sure somebody will figure out how to do it. but the color is also oil-based so that you can wet it and let it dry and then wet it again. And the paper is hopefully not, being way smaller or way bigger between individual prints. So maybe it had to do with that.
Right. That's something that listeners who aren't artists themselves probably don't know, really, is that every time you dampen the paper, it can shrink or expand. And that this is why everyone talks about why registration is so difficult. And you can really throw you off. But I don't know. Sometimes I love seeing the offness as a kind of conceit of making,
That's so true. I really love an offset print, and especially all those extra colors that you get at the edges of an offset print.
Right.
And actually, often I try to have areas like that, but in a figurative piece, there are places where it's better for that not to happen. Around faces, faces need to stay pretty recognizable, but areas of pattern can get weird.
So you went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for undergrad?
No, I went to Brown for undergrad and I studied philosophy. I went to Brown thinking that I might also be able to take classes at RISD, which I kind of did, but it was a little bit harder than it appeared on paper to do that, partly because one is on a semester system and one is on a trimester system, but also because it might have just been my outlook at the time. Everything else seemed to come before the art. So I would finish the papers and the work and the math and everything, and then the art would have the remaining amount of time. But it is really nice to have the art have all the time. And that is what I had at SAIC. It wasn't a master's program. It was an undergraduate BFA for people who'd already done a BA, and it was just studio courses, and I loved it.
Oh, I bet. How long were you there?
Just 2 years.
2 years.
And I would have probably taken a printmaking class, but my mom is an artist, and she said, take a printmaking class while you have access to all those machines and materials, because those are hard to find later. And then you fall in love with it and you have to find those things later. But yeah, so I took some printmaking classes there and just fell in love with it.
Who was teaching printmaking at SAIC?
A lot of great people. So the first class I took was a screen print class, and that was a summer, all-intensive, do nothing but that thing class, and I loved it. And this was Peter Power who taught that, and I love screen printing and still do, but I don't use it very often now, mostly because of how messy it is. But if I had access to a studio, I'd love to do it again. And then after that, I had etching with Michael Miller, etching is my favorite. I think, and I was just reading in this book that he showed me, and I reread again recently. This is Kath Ann Brown's Magical Secrets About Thinking Creatively, but it's really chapters and vignettes about her experience working with different artists at Crown Point. This was a great reference at the time, but in it, she mentions that intaglio is the only printmaking method where there's a variable thickness of ink. The ink surface is not uniform. And I had never articulated that to myself before, but I love it.
Is that right? Yeah, I guess that's right.
I mean, definitely has been right for a long time. I do think that now with 3D printing that might be changing, but in terms of the traditional processes that people talk about, I think that might be right.
That's interesting, because I think of an ability to gouge deeper or not so deep in wood or whatever, but that really doesn't affect anything except for the width of the line or the cut, right?
Unless you cheat. I mean, I was thinking about the same thing. I sat there for a second, like, is that right?
Is that right?
I think with a woodcut, if you were to take a rag and do a little mono printing on it so that you had thinner layers and thicker layers, then technically you could have that with relief. But for the most part, I think it is right. And I
We
love that about it.
Yeah, we need to find some woodcut people that can talk to us about variable ink depth. Interesting, interesting. So what happened after you finished up at SAIC?
So then I was super lucky to find myself in Berkeley. In Berkeley, California is Kala Art Institute, which was for me my printmaking ecosystem crossroads train station, because it's an amazing facility. And then they have people who are there all the time, and then they have artists coming through. And so you have everything. And I met so many people through Kala and printed for 7 years there, I guess. So it was great. I met Miguel Aragon while he was there and have loved looking at his work since.
Yeah, I love his work too.
So yeah, that was just a wonderful place to be. And I had access to all the things that you would normally have in a studio, at least not right away. And then after Kala, we moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and that's when I got this puppy. And I've been sort of working here or at a residency ever since.
Where did you get your press?
Tackage.
Tackage? Oh, it's a new one. Okay.
It's on wheels, so it's very mobile.
Nice. I always ask people about their presses because I'm convinced there's a story behind every press, and that some of the ones that haven't come directly out of Tackage's shop in the last, 30 years probably were owned by somebody super cool before you.
That's probably true.
Yeah. I'm starting a database. I'm trying to figure out where everybody got their presses.
The personalities of the history and personality.
Yeah, the provenance. Yeah. That's cool. So the thing that I love about I love your etchings. Well, actually, some of them are more dry point than etchings, it looks like to me, which I find fascinating.
Most of them are dry point, partly because I only have access to acid fleetingly, although I think that's about to change in our basement. But until now, I've only had access to ferric chloride at residencies.
Oh, okay.
So, but that's not the only reason. I just love dry point. I feel like with printmaking, there's this indirect correlate to a lot of direct methods that people often use. And to me, dry point is like pencil or charcoal instead of like an etched line, which I would think of more as kind of like pen and ink. That they have a roughness that's pretty expressive. And I love that about it. And I also love that ability to burnish. The ability to erase is nice. So it's not just that I don't have acid.
Right. Have you incorporated mezzotint in any of them?
A little bit every now and then. I have a rocker. Yeah, and I'm definitely open to using other methods of tone. So yeah, sometimes just throwing it on the ground or things like that. Just anything for a new tone.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah.
But the other thing about your work that I love is that you are most definitely not staying in the printmaking swim lane, but that you often, there's lots of hand coloring that happens in some of these portraits, which I think is super cool, in addition to the woodcut layer of color. But then there's this whole series of prints that are based on these sort of color wheel forms that are printed, but then everything on top is not a print, which I am in love with personally. And then there's some sculptures too. I'm like, what? This woman is all over the place. And my God.
It is. I do like a lot of media. I also think it's good to use new media because you're so uncomfortable or you don't know it so well that, it's educational. But I like to use printmaking for its variable repeatability. So, it's not a photocopier. You can tell the difference between each new proof, and you can really push the variability and then use that for different reasons. I generally work in projects, and those projects last 2 to 3 years. I like for the medium to make sense for the project, for there to be a real conceptual reason to use that medium. And so the color wheels are so great because one of the rules of the color wheels game is that Well, let me just describe it.
Yes, let's
First of
start
all,
at the
just
top.
the project. So the project is that you have this origin, this matrix that in this case is a wheel of some kind. And that is the blank slate. So that's the white paper. Everything starts from this shape. And then I think of them individually, just use them to do anything, to document the color of the sea over a day, or just see how, do a color chart for any other material or anything. Or I did many watercolor paintings of birds for a while where I would break down the colors used in those paintings around the bird itself. Then once there are at least 9, I would put them out on the floor or up on the wall and rearrange them like a puzzle that you don't know what it's supposed to look like until these moments of connection would just happen, where the flow would clearly go from one panel to the next organically. And then at that point, I would try to say, okay, now this collection is itself a unit, and we need to make it its best self given what's here right now. And that part is super, I think, healthy and also hard, because sometimes you have to get rid of things that are beautiful because they're taking away from the larger composition. But sometimes something is so beautiful, you think, okay, this whole composition is working towards shining a light on this thing. And so it can be heartbreaking, but I think very healthy. And one of the rules is that often, unless it was one of these other sort of example color wheel sets, the connection between panels has to happen with different media. So, this panel might be mostly watercolor, but this one will be acrylic and this one will be printmaking. And anyway, there are rules. They can be broken, but I have to have a good reason.
But why the media rule? That's interesting.
I think partly just because
Challenge?
it's a challenge, and it's fun, and I think it makes the pieces pretty dynamic because there's just a lot different things going on. But I've learned some things about the different media doing it.
The thing that has occurred to me while you've been talking, sometimes these ideas come to me, that I was trying to figure out as I was reading through your catalog, which is available online. I'll put a link to it, that using the color wheel to me was a great organizer of form and definitely a way to structure ideas around a radial arm. But I hadn't thought about breaking down the colors in the way that you've described them, which I think is super cool. But it's also cool because you're starting from the single color elements that are trying to form a cohesive whole, not just across this one 9x9 panel or however big those are, but across this entirety. And so that the fact that they all come back to this single color wheel as the base is, I don't know, for me, it was like a design element, but it's so much more than that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
No, I agree. It's kind of a home, kind of an origin. And that's what I love. I still haven't sort of figured out this magical printmaking thing. There's always this origin that's not there. It's the plate. The matrix is not there anymore. And yet you see it all over the place. I remember when you're first learning about Plato and the shadows on the cave and this idea of ideal things and then facsimiles of things. I mean, at the time when I was reading it, I thought, oh, that's so silly. I mean, obviously people know that there's not an ideal thing out there that everything's copying, but that is exactly what is happening with printmaking all the time. Every proof that you're pulling is this projection of this thing that most people, I mean, you the printmaker, see it, but most people will not see. And it's crazy. And it's crazy as a printmaker to see all the different versions that it can be from this one thing. I know a lot of printmakers really prefer the plate to the print that comes from it. But it is it is a wonderful thing.
But it's so interesting that the matrix, albeit the genesis and the center point of its own creation. Whoa, we're getting deep, of its own creation. That you're right. It's invisible, but it's like hanging over the whole thing. Like you can't get away from it, but it's only a reflection of it. Oh, it's so weird. Oh God,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, I love that. I love that whole part. And so, yeah, I think the color wheels, most of my projects last 2 to 3 years, but that one I hope will last, however long my life is, because I've been doing that since 2012. And each time, you can use it to inform whatever projects are happening at that moment and focus it on different things. The matrix doesn't have to be a wheel. I like it, but I have tried to work on other shapes that tile the plane, because actually it's not a wheel, it's a square. And there's other shapes and super interesting shapes that tile the plane either regularly or irregularly. While I was printing in Berkeley, which I was doing during the day, my money job in the evenings was working as a freelance illustrator, mostly for my mom. And one of the things we did a lot back then, which I think people really don't need to do in the same way anymore because of AI and advanced capabilities in Adobe, but I loved doing and never regret a minute, all the hours spent doing it, was creating seamless tiles.
Oh.
Pattern, like for textile design. And my personal goals there were always to, especially with a toss, for example, to figure out how to tile the planes so that this toss looked random.
Right.
And you couldn't be able to quickly distinguish the place where things start to repeat, which is super hard to do because random is not gently scattered. Random is random. And that looks different. It just looks different. So yeah, I loved that. Actually, I really enjoyed doing that work. And it had to do with printmaking.
Yeah. I have a friend who, for a while, maybe 10 years, was creating patterns to use in women's cycling jerseys. And I was the illustrator, puller aparter of files that she had, bought from someone, and we would change them into what she wanted. And trying to wrangle those patterns and the edges and the repeat. Oh my God, it's such a pain in the butt. Even with a computer, I can't imagine doing it by hand.
I mean, I used a computer a lot, but you can definitely do it by hand with that method of the toilet paper method. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And so I have done, although I haven't shown many of them, arrangements for color wheels that aren't not sets of 9 squares. They're sets of hexagons that kind of flow a little bit, and then maybe rectangles. And then for a while, I'm looking because all the plans are up here on the wall, but for a while I was then trying to use them to look at poetry, especially really formal poetry, and think, okay, if this is what a foot looks like, and this is how many feet are in this poem, and this is the content of this poem, this is what this poem would look like as a visual object, something like that. So there are definitely ways to bend that color wheels project to try to address different needs.
But I do feel like there's a human need for order, right? In terms of starting with a grid or a color wheels shape or something. Even if you're imposing randomness on top of it, like it's such a fascinating compositional conundrum.
It is, and it doesn't always work.
Right.
Yeah, but that's also what I love about printmaking. I feel like actually a lot of us want to get lucky and have that magical moment where happenstance, like where you cover the plate with the blanket and the reveal on the other side is just pure amazing. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. And I think that's just part of, luck and chance have so much in common. I think printmaking is nice because you have less control and you have more chance, so you can get lucky, but you're also going to get equally unlucky, maybe more unlucky, and you have the insurance of being able to throw those away and print more. And so I feel like you fail more, but you have a safety net in the plate and the cost of materials and things like that.
When you're working on these color wheel compositions, the grids, and one of the rules is that they can't be in the same media, which is cool, super cool. But you're also turning them sometimes, right? Because if they're color wheels and they're basically abstract, the birds are different because they need to stand up, right? But in these other ones that are kind of abstract, they can twist and turn around. But then there's this interesting thing that happens, and tell me if I'm not reading the images right online, that you have a dashed line around the exterior of each of the squares, which in my mind suddenly turned into the cut them out, a pop-up. I don't even know what they were called when we were kids, but that they're marking these edges that are cut out and movable and shapeable. And so that there's this interesting kind of conceit there that pulls everything together.
I never looked at it like that, and I'm really glad you said it, because it makes me want to. I mean, there's so much that you could do with a laser cut, edge like that. At first, the edge was reflective of map edges, because sometimes on a map you'll find that there's a scale edge or something like that. And I tried to take it off at one point and didn't like it. It just wasn't gluing the way I had remembered the other ones gluing. And so I think of those as zippers. I don't know why they seem to do the zipping job so well, but they kind of do. And I can't tell you why, but I have tried it without them, and I do not like it without them.
Well, and a solid line outlining the square inside the grid would to me be too complete in a way.
Maybe those empty spaces are asking to be reflected.
Well, and you're asking for connection between each of the squares too, right?
Yeah. I think that is correct.
I love them because I do love a luscious watercolor, and your palette is totally English landscape watercolors from the 18th century for me. And I feel the water, I feel the wind, I feel nature, even in one that's more red and pink than others. But you can take them anywhere you want. I think that's why they're so pleasing and comfortable in their appeal to me. I can feel I'm in the Cotswolds, or I can be, on the beach and looking at a Diebenkorn or something, like they're great.
And I do think that watercolor on intaglio has a certain amount of nostalgia that just happens. I think because of the plate tone, it sort of pre-ages the watercolor and makes it look like it came from another time. I love that.
Yeah. Well, and then tell us a little bit about the ones that are reflecting earlier works of art, like
the kind of master studies ones.
Yeah, the master studies with the gorgeous Japanese nude brushing her hair. Oh my God, I love that one.
Oh, I like it. That one was fun. Yeah, no, for a while, for one of the Color Wheels shows, I did really intentionally. Sometimes what will happen is I'll make a mistake, or something will just accidentally happen in one project that is so interesting to me that it begins the next project. And this kind of accidentally happened with one of the Color Wheels sets, that all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, that's the same composition as the Great Wave, but it hadn't been intentional. And so then I thought, oh my gosh, I could do this with anything. And so then it was a great way to go, because I just generally love to do master studies, because when you're having an emotional response to a piece of art, it's not always clear why. And usually a master study will help work through that a little bit. And so these were kind of like master studies, where you could really look at a piece, and I would read about the piece and the history of the piece and how it was made, and then divide it up, and then again go back to the original, let's look at this individually part of the Color Wheel project, which is important, because if you first have to make each panel its own composition, you can't just dive in and have, if there's a blank area in a painting, you can't just be like, oh, this is a blank panel. This is just a blank area. No, it first has to be a panel I would be willing to sell as itself, or, give someone as itself. And so then you realize, oh, the blank areas aren't just blank areas. They're really important and not very intricate areas or something like that, but they are. And I learned a lot about the pieces that I was looking at doing that. And often the piece would be in there somewhere, or, sometimes I start running out of ideas and you do things you would never normally do, cutting out all the sections of the piece that were the same color and rearranging them into groups, like in a color theory class, and just pushing you out of your everyday routine.
Well, they're pretty far away from doing dry point portraits, really.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that it's a nice palette cleanser. For not getting too tired of doing one thing, I guess. Or
the pink and yellow de Kooning ode was definitely out of your comfort zone. And the red one, the totally red one.
Yeah, those were unusual. But I love that de Kooning piece. I love the colors of that de Kooning piece. And I didn't realize that it itself had been inspired by a much more traditional piece that he was looking at. And so...
Was it Actaeon? Is it Titian or somebody?
Yeah, I think it is. A much more muted palette. Mm-hmm. What he came up with.
But that reminds me of, and I wonder if you've looked at them, and if you haven't, you should, Sherry Levine's Portfolio Meltdown. Have you ever looked at that?
Oh, no.
Okay, everybody, go look it up. I actually wrote a blog post about it on my Ann Schaefer art blog. It's a set of 4 woodcuts that, well, they're not even woodcuts, they're colored wood blocks that have been jigged together. So each is a grid. And the grid colors, 12 colors, are averaged out of famous paintings that she has selected.
Oh, I have. Yes. I love those. Yeah. Okay, but I am going to go back and look. And actually, I looked at that for one of them.
Right. Well, you have a different approach, but it's the same kind of idea of organizing, but not organizing. Like it's great. There's good connection there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to go back and look at that. And actually, now that you say that, the whole thing really came out of my love for Dieter Roth's Piccadilly series, because I guess I wrote a paper about it for...
You did? About Dieter Roth? Oh my God.
And I just loved it. One of the assignments was we had to look at the real thing. So we had to find a print in the collection and then ask to go see it in the print viewing room, which was, they say you only look at a painting in a museum for like 5 seconds or something. But then when somebody's gone to all the effort to bring you something to look at, you really do feel like you need to sit there for at least 30 minutes to make it worth their while. And that is a long time. So I really did look at those pieces for a while. And there's a lot of similarities there. So he was having that Piccadilly postcard reproduced on an offset printer, and they were changing the ink as it was being printed. So already he was starting from this variable set of reproductions, and then from there just doing a million things on top of them. But I just think they look so great as a group and did a lot of the things that I was hoping to achieve with the color wheel set.
Yeah, the Dieter wrote Piccadilly's set that we purchased. Darcy Alexander purchased it for the BMA when I was there. And they came in framed because on the back they had an example of the postcard also, or probably a reproduction, obviously, but framed back there so you could kind of see what the reference was, which I thought was cool, even though you really wouldn't see that if it was exhibited in the gallery space. But they were very...
Did they stay framed? They stayed in there?
We left them in the frames, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are they framed the way they do with like these circles in the corners? So you can see both sides of the print?
Yeah, no, not in this case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, these were conventional frames, but they did have a little cutout sort of window. The cover paper would show you the thing. But they're the most bizarre things. Like some are like just colored blops, and then there's glittery black sandpaper overlooking sandpaper, I mean, they're just bizarre. And when they first came in, I was like, Darcy, what are you buying? And then, of course, they became a, fan favorite.
They're so fun. And I love that he did so many that you can tell he had to move beyond the obvious. So, I mean, it makes sense that in the first couple, you would highlight those great double-decker buses because that's a focus already. They're cool. But then after you've already highlighted the buses, what else are you going to highlight? And finally, you start highlighting all the things that are the things that you wouldn't maybe have noticed the first time around.
Yeah. Yeah, that took me a while to sink into those puppies. Yeah.
And some of them I think had they're not all archival. Like some of his work is intentionally going to eat away at itself or something like that.
Yeah, Darcy was in love with Dieter Roth, and she did a big Franz West show, and I think Franz was in love with Dieter Roth too. So there was this whole Dieter Roth thing going on, and she purchased this drawing. I know my fingers are air quoting here, and it was a plastic sheet envelope of plastic that was gridded. I don't know how they gridded it, but inside were chocolate wafers and milk.
Okay. The beauty of mold growth.
Degrading over time. Yes. A real nightmare for the conservators in the museum's collection area. But yeah, it was very weird and it was cool. It was super cool. Because I don't think that I had, probably prior to that, really dealt in a collection with work that was supposed to degrade and supposed to not be really a thing ever, And that concept was, it kind of broke my brain for a little while. I was like, what? Because I'm such a concert, I'm hired to be the curator of a collection and take care of things, right?
But it's equally natural as a burn print, maybe. I mean, you have that much control over it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like his work. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
but
cool.
I wouldn't want to try to conserve it.
Yeah, they were monitoring it very closely, I have to say. Had its own little environment, it was very elaborate. So let's go back to the printmaking thing. You've got these beautiful young people portraits that usually have some sort of nod to something else, Frida, or this idea of the Mobius strip fascinator. And I'm curious, well, first of all, let's talk about the ages of the portrait sitters, which is what we were talking about right before we hit the word go. What did we discover?
The ages have changed, but I have started thinking about age, especially as I continue to age. Well, what usually happens with the portrait series is there's kind of 3 stages in each one, and I'll have an idea that I want to explore, and then begin the portrait series. And then after you have about 10, you can start to make judgments about this group, and new ideas emerge at that point. With the Fridas, I had noticed that a lot of people were dressing as Frida Kahlo for Halloween. And we were in the Bay Area, so there was also at that time a Frida show and then a Frida lookalike contest. They were just everywhere. And so I just thought, that's so fun, and I'm going to do some portraits of all these people dressed as the same person just to see what happens. And a lot of things happened. One was that I really felt like when everybody's dressing as the same person, you start to notice the individuals even more almost. And then there were a variety of ages, and it was a great illustration of ageism, or my own ageism, or when you see a very young person dressing up as something else. I think a lot of people view it differently than if you see an older person dressing up as something else. And also just things I learned about portraiture, because this was, really in the beginning of my printmaking, the difference in somebody looking to the right or looking to the left. And you touched on this with Art Werger, and I think it's so right that we Westerners think of, while we read left to right, we think of looking towards the right as looking towards the future, and looking backwards as looking to the past. And I know this is not the same for other people in other language systems, but for us, for me, for sure, when I reverse a plate, or because I spend a lot of time on composition before making a plate. And so I have an idea of what it looks like. And then when I reverse it, sometimes I have to go, oh my gosh, No, wait. I have to rework this now because, you're looking in a different direction. But so after doing about 10 or 12, I started noticing things that were coming forward, things I wanted to focus on. And then the next group became more like those. I zoomed in a little bit more. I focused more on people who are looking at the viewer. I think an eye connection with a viewer is really powerful. And then they started getting younger because I and people in general were really responding to the younger people dressing up in a sort of different aspirational way. So that changed. And I didn't always love the way it changed. Like the younger thing, I had really mixed feelings about. And then once it gets to the point where I think this has gotten away from me or something else comes up, then it opens up a new print series. And one of the things that just happened there was that a lot of people they would put hearts, they would wear hearts because a lot of Frida Kahlo's self-portraits have that anatomical open heart. And so people had that. And also people would often wear something in their hair, some sort of flower or a headpiece. And I noticed that the hearts really felt like a metaphor. And the hair also, the more abstract the headpiece became, the more I started thinking that almost looks like an idea. And so from that portrait project, 2 other portrait projects sprung out. One was this Lonely Hearts project where the mission was, first of all, it was going to be heads and arms and hands. So I had a little bit more body expression to work with. And there had to be the shape of a heart somewhere in the composition as its little allegory. So that was one shoot off. And then the other shoot off was the Fascinator series of portraits of mostly women and girls with these Mobius strips on their heads, because at the time I wanted to find a more abstract shape that could also be a metaphor. And so the Mobius strip is that shape and topology where you can start and cross the entire single-sided surface and return to the place where you began, having covered the whole thing. However, in a 2-dimensional world, you return flipped. You return a slightly different self. And so I thought that was a good metaphor for different types of thinking, circular thinking. And my art has definitely been therapeutic for me at different times in my life in a lot of ways. And so while I was doing that project at a residency in Rockport, a real therapist came up and she said, I'm interested in this work, and we were talking about circular thinking, and she goes, but circular thinking is what I try to help my patients not do. And I was like, yeah. And so then at that point was when I started thinking, what other shapes and topology would be really nice to think about? And I took a class, this was right before the pandemic now. I took a math class because we live on the Wake Forest campus. So I took a topology class and started thinking about these other shapes in math. And when they're describing these shapes, they use a lot of common language that, if you aren't a mathematician, sounds very poetic and descriptive of something other than a shape. And so that's when I started looking into other forms and more complicated forms, which then shot off into this whole painting project. But they're all connected. I mean, it's all a quest, a braided quest.
But the painting series, the one that struck me so hard was the one after the Bouguereau broken pitcher, which is, a symbol of loss of virginity or purity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you've replaced if I'm recalling correctly, replaced the pitcher with a Klein vessel bottle.
And so a Klein bottle is really related topologically to a Mobius strip. It's basically like an added dimension to a Mobius strip, from what I understand. But when we look at pictures of them, they look like bottles. And when you make a 3D projection of one, it looks like, what are those things that you air out wine in?
Oh, an aerator. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they look like aerators a lot, I think. And anyway, but a Klein bottle has some great, there's just a lot of open possibilities with it. And so I did start replacing the broken pitcher, which was its own metaphor, with just other things. And that was one of them, because it was a good example of a painting that I love. I love that painting. And I hate it that I love it. Like, I was like, why do I have to love this painting so much?
Yeah.
And then just making these small changes to it was a great way of realizing, do I still love it now? Do I still love it now? Has it lost anything, or has it gained anything? And then from there, the whole figure started getting replaced with this form that was called a Julia sweep. But these forms in topology where things kind of go off into chaos. And then this particular one back to itself. So it starts with a unit circle. It kind of goes with all this sort of self-similar fractal stuff happening. And then it comes back to a unit circle. You know, it's at home, it explores, it comes back home, which I think is very similar conceptually to the whole color wheels thing. Yeah, I just like this home base idea. And so even though they were paintings and looked totally different from the other stuff, it was all one train of thought.
Well, if you know you and your aesthetics, you definitely have a through line there. It's not completely out of left field.
Yeah, that's true. And there were a lot of prints in that one, because finally, for the paintings, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't draft this same girl out 20 times. And so I just made a plate, and then I would glue the plate to the panel and then oil paint on top, so that I had, everything was going to be placed in the same place on the paintings.
Right. I think that makes sense. Why?
Yeah.
Why torture yourself?
Why work too hard? There's already things that are hard enough.
There's I like to tell people, there's no artist on the planet who won't take the tool that will help them make things more efficient,
Exactly.
What are you talking about? Which is why there's digital and everything now, right?
Yeah. I loved it when an art worker was saying, no more than 2 plates. 2 plates is my maximum.
Yeah.
It's got to work with this.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, he's amazing. I feel like we were talking the other day. We had a start at this the other day, and then we had to give it up because my Comcast people killed our internet. But we had a very short conversation about art workers, the 2-plate example where he was testing out these grids of warm and cool colors to see what would happen. And I was challenging, wasn't I? Challenging you to make that actually work on purpose.
Yeah, that would take so much work, but I do think it would be a great challenge. And I do use his methods, although I haven't used them like he does with the same plate, printing the same plate twice on itself, inking it in different ways, except for every now and then to remedy a problem. But when he uses it with intent from the start. And so, yeah, that has gotten me thinking, because I do like to try to have multiple inking spots on woodcuts, especially if it's possible, just to make things
easier. Yeah, watching him, because there's some great videos out there of him doing the a la Poupe inking on those. I'm like, how he's so deft at it. Just
he is amazing, and he says his ink is very thin. So I'm gonna explore that a little more, because I have never been able to keep a la Poupe ink in its spot quite the way that he manages to do it.
I agree.
Yeah, but I also kind of love that. I love the Mary Cassatt prints where you can tell the 2 areas for a la Poupe are just close enough that you get a little bit of bleed or reflection from one area to the next. It often looks really good.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like a little off register something as evidence of its making. Is there something coming up that we should know about?
Yes. So as part of Print Austin, and I'm super excited about it because it's the first time I've gotten to do something at Print Austin. I have just prints on view at Wally Workman in Austin through the end of January. So I'll be there on the 25th for an artist talk, and also an artist talk at the Artist Run Club, which is the first time I've heard of this, but it's a group of artists who meet early in the morning at a gallery. They'll have an artist talk, and then they'll go run 2 to 4 miles.
Sorry.
I know, I'm really impressed by it.
Me too.
So,
oh my God.
Yeah. Anyway.
4 miles? No.
There you go.
Yeah, as we're recording this, everybody, it's the middle of January. So, yeah, Ellen's show is up through the end of the month. But by the time this is aired, I'm sorry to say it will no longer be up, which is too bad. We need to get you a big fat show in a museum, girl.
Well, to be honest, I'm very thankful to just keep making prints, which is a lucky thing to be able to do. So
it's true. Yeah. Yes, that is true. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I talk to a lot of artists, obviously, and I don't know, true confessions. I'm always really nervous. I'm most nervous about talking to artists because there is this layer of conceptual something that happens when you're creating art, right? That you have to think about why you're doing it, or the symbols you're using, or, the layers, which I'm always worried that I won't quite be able to articulate and or understand before. So it's always very nerve-wracking for me, but I feel like you are a super generous artist. There are things that are hiding and there to be discovered if you're digging around in them, but there's also this kind of generosity of spirit and this, you're not childlike, but this kind of childlike openness to the world, which I really appreciate.
Well, thank you. I was also scared to talk to you, but I do think that I appreciate work that is immediately accessible. I like it to be very friendly from the start. And then if people want to linger, hopefully there's more to find. I have been spending a lot of time recently making picture books with print processes as well. So it's a good example of trying to be accessible even to, children will notice a lot more, I think. And also people in general will spend more time looking at art in a picture book probably than even on the wall in a lot of cases, just because of how long a page is open when you're reading it. It's longer than the 5 seconds that they say you spend in the museum. And so I have been thinking about that format a lot and how it impacts how we see art in the future, because I was thinking almost all of the early art I was exposed to was in the form of picture books. I mean, we went to museums too, but
there's a difference, maybe, possibly, correct me if I'm wrong. One of the differences is the setting in which you are taking in the art, right? That there's not this pressure to be all knowing and knowledgeable and smart when you're standing in a museum, when you're reading to your kids at night, you can linger and not worry about somebody going, do they get it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, it is certainly more accessible to a wider range of people than people who are, in New York going to the Met, or in Winston-Salem going to, the Rinaldi House.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Rinaldi House is there.
Yeah. Wow, I'm really impressed. Yes.
Well, the director of the Rinaldi House used to work with us at the BMA, Allison Perkins.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have follow her on the socials, see what she's up to. Yeah, so.
We do have some great museums around here.
Yeah, where did you grow up?
In a lot of different places, but mostly from 3rd grade to graduating high school, Austin, Texas.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Print Austin is a homecoming.
It would. I mean, I left and I never came back, and Print Austin got started after that, but it feels really good to go to Austin.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You're a delight, and I really love your work. And I hope that the Wally Workman show is successful and brings in lots of new fans, and I'm sure it will. And maybe this episode will too, because hopefully we'll spread the word about you and your work, and things will happen.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me.
Oh, of course. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with my guest Ellen Heck. A special thank you to her for coming on the pod. I enjoyed talking to her immensely and I love her work, so you should all seek it out. Thank yous also go to my support team, primarily to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for being my sound guy, thanks Dan, and to Uncle Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And also one to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for the use of sounds that they sent me from their studios that make up the soundscape that opens and closes each episode. Images Ellen and I talk to are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can do other stuff over there. Primarily, I want you to hit the support and donate button and help me keep the lights on. You know, it's a labor of love, and I do love doing it, and I will keep doing it, but it is a labor of love. Yeah, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.